Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Crime Centric. This being a show where we talk about crime dramas that I watch. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the season finale of Instinct. A lot of interesting things went down in this season finale, so let's break it down. I was actually surprised how the whole Maya situation worked out. I was kind of expecting it to become like a public thing. Like I thought, like my thoughts about the precinct, Lizzie and whatnot would get this case. And it's like, no, not at all. I guess because they never really talked about how that was just kind of brushed under the rug. But I guess Julian, CIA officials or MI6 officials came and to claim her body or whatever. So I guess it became like I don't know, maybe like Julian has connections to kind of handle that stuff discreetly. I'm just surprised like there wasn't a whole crime scene situation and everything. So that was interesting. Obviously, Julian and Dylan get examined. Obviously, Julian has a clean bill of health, and so does Dylan, but Dylan's vision is getting blurred. And I love Julian being like, oh yeah, and because the doctor's like, oh, maybe it's age's factor. He's like, age? It's like, and Julian was like, yeah, she's saying you're getting old. And he's like, thanks for that analysis, Doc. Referring to Julian, so. But it is kind of concerning. And I love how that gets played into the episode, because for Dylan, it's like his sight matters, because for him, it's like, because you can tell the entire episode, he's not 100% himself. He's actually off quite a bit. In this particular episode, for him, it's like, because... And I thought that was such a heartfelt thing of like, when he ends up explaining it later on to Lizzie, how like, if I can't read people, how can I do my job? How can I be myself? Because that's kind of what he's kind of built himself around. Obviously, like if he can't read people anymore, he can't do his job of working with Lizzie, because he's not really, that's kind of his bread and butter, what he brings to the table. But it's also what he's kind of built himself around is his knowledge of understanding people. And I think for him, that's how he goes through life, is being able to read people, to understand people. And if he can't do that, then he's kind of blind out in the world, I just thought that was kind of a sad thing to kind of be like, oh man, that's kind of intrinsic to who you are, and how important it is, and how vulnerable you kind of are without it, or at least because this is all happening while he's dealing with the whole Pasternak situation, which I also love that whole thing of like, oh, his new name that he's using is Goodman. It's like, really? I guess the irony isn't lost on him. Good man, so there's that whole situation. I also love that this brings up the whole conversation of vacations. The fact is that Lizzie doesn't really take one. She's like, yeah, I stay at home. I mean, it's a staycation, what Jasmine corrects her. A staycation is when you stay at home, but you go and do stuff that you normally wouldn't do. You don't do that. You just straight up just stay at home. This particular case that they're working on, which I'm surprised, because I was actually kind of expecting this to deal with a lot more about the Pasternak thing, but it's like actually a different case in general. Basically, there's a severed head found in like a pond, but it doesn't turn out to just be one severed head, it's multiple. And we also had another interesting development. Doug asked Lizzie out on a date. I'm like, wait, what? Are you serious? And she's like, wait, what? Where's this coming? He's like, yeah, I've been meaning to ask for a while. They've always had this bit of this flirtatious thing going on. Because he had made that like kind of crude joke about like hands all over her body or something. He's like, oh, I didn't mean that. But it's like, oh, and she's like quickly to try and change the subject. He makes references to some lyrics, and the way she responds, being like, oh, we just talked about Grease, which I'm guessing I'm aware of Grease. I don't think I've ever seen Grease. I've seen bits and pieces. I don't think I've ever sat down and watched the entirety of Grease. I don't even think I've ever seen 75% of Grease. It's a whole conversation in itself, but I just thought that was interesting. And Dylan walking in there, and it's just like awkward. And notice Lizzie never went back to answer that. That was, you kind of feel bad. You feel a little bad for Doug. I also love Dylan's walking by, and he's got this look on his face. I'm like, what's Dylan about to say? And he's like, you ever heard of Hamlet? And he's walking by all those severed heads. And I love Doug is like, you can say the speech, just don't touch the heads. And you almost have Dylan be like, come on, dude. He has that disappointed look like, really? Come on. You gonna crush my vibe like that? Or was that more of Dylan being like, wait, you thought I was gonna do that? You think so little of me? I think it's the former. I think it's just like, don't crush my vibe, dude. I was almost in the moment. It would have been good. But no, you had to ruin all the fun, Doug. Fine, be like that. Be all professional and whatnot. So there's that. Obviously, Ryan is leaving, so everyone's kind of saying their goodbyes and everything. It's like, Fucci giving him a hug and everything. Oh, it's so beautiful. We're going to miss you, bro. We're going to miss you. And then it turns out later on he actually never left. He never went back to Nebraska. He stayed in New York. I was under the impression, I'm like, are you, I was like, nah, because at first I was a legitimate like, did he sleep with Jasmine? That's where I was starting to think. I was like, no, Jasmine wouldn't be crazy enough to do that at work. So, but I was like, why else are you there and you're skulking around? I was like, I felt like he was lying when he was talking about it later on, what he was doing there. But in the grand scheme of things, it's like, it makes sense. Essentially, he didn't want to pay for a hotel. I love that it's like, yeah, 150 for a hotel. She's like, wait, you found a hotel for 150? He's like, really? After all the things I've said, that's what you focus on. But, you know, for Ryan, it's like, you know, he didn't get to enjoy New York because of the case and everything. And it's not like, you know, Nebraska needs him back immediately. So it's like, why don't I just kick it here in New York? Even saying like, oh, you can go to this fight with me, Lizzie. I mean, obviously just as friends. And it's like, oh, whoa, she is coming off a breakup. Obviously, still as friends and stuff like that. But part of me is like, oh, that still could bubble up to be something else. So I just love that. I love that it's just a little bit of the episode and it never comes back around that Ryan is there. I guess no one else ever finds out. Maybe like during the day, he's out he's out and about enjoying New York, and then he waits till like, okay, everyone's left the precinct and now I can go in and stay. Which is like, I'm sure if Jasmine called him, that'd be a whole conversation like, Ryan, what the hell are you doing? I'm sure Fucci would never let him live it down. So there's that whole conversation in itself. So. But the interesting thing about this case is obviously trying to figure out, like, okay, who's behind all this? What's this all about? The first victim is the only head that they can identify at first. His name's Victor. He used to be part of a gang. Well, he worked at this, essentially a research facility. There's this dude named Portman and his wife, Allison, who's played by Emily Swallow, which is interesting in many different regards. Obviously, wasn't it recently she popped up in... Yeah, she was most recently in an episode of Elementary this past season. Also interesting enough, kind of another CBS connection, is the fact is that she was in the second half of season 6 of The Mentalist. You know, once again, another CBS show. So it's just, that's just more in my mind. I'm like, oh, connection. That's just network connection, stuff like that. Just always kind of brings my mind. But nevertheless, it was kind of interesting because Portman kind of seemed like he's one of those smart people that once he focuses on something, he kind of lets a lot of like, what would be the word? Courtesies kind of go. Like, he doesn't treat people kind of right. It's kind of like, oh, you're here investigating murder. Yeah, my research is kind of important. So could you basically, he was kind of about it a little bit of a nicer way, but he was basically saying kind of, go to hell away, I got work to do. The fact of the matter is all this testing we're doing today kind of has to be thrown out because you interrupted, so thanks for screwing that up. In its own way, he was basically saying that, so I thought that was kind of interesting. But then later on, you kind of understand a little bit more why he's the way he is, because it's like, all right, because his wife has Alzheimer's, and, you know, because you could tell something was up at first because she couldn't find the word for tattoo, and then it happened again, and then Dylan started pointing out the fact is, yeah, she has Alzheimer's because, like, the notes kind of telling her, reminding her to do kind of even the simplest things. But for her, it's like the diagnosis was scary, and I'm sure that, you know, Dylan can kind of resonate to a certain extent because now he's kind of worried, like, something might be wrong with him, but obviously he didn't kind of go there. But for him, it's like, you know, for her, it's like, yes, it's scary knowing that diagnosis, but at the very least, it puts her in a new mindset to enjoy life. Make it like, while she's still, you know, cognizant enough that she can keep memories, you know, tight enough in her mind that, you know, get as many new memories as possible. Kind of basically enjoy life while you can, you know. So there's kind of a nice, you know, silver lining to the whole situation. Until later on, it turns out her and her husband might be the killers, because like his whole thing in the past was he would cut off pigs' heads to study the brains, and it seems like that's what this might all be about. This might be connected to his research, that he might have gone beyond just to get further in this research to help his wife, but because there's even evidence pointing to her being involved because it's all on her computer. But if he was involved, it would be on his computer. So like, what's going on there? Obviously Dylan and Lizzie don't think they're responsible, but then looking through some other stuff, with Julian's help, they were able to identify the other victims. It turns out that eventually they find out they all had life-threatening illnesses, and it seems like this all stems back to Dr. Wells. Now, that was an interesting thing. Side note, I love the fact is when Dylan sees a guillotine, he's like, oh my god, which is like, holy crap, you have a full-blown guillotine. That's interesting. But when Dylan presses the switch and the blade comes out, you see him kind of turn towards Lizzie. He's got a big smile on his face. It's like, that's a little messed up that you're super excited like that. But the fact that, I mean, to be fair, that's Dylan. That's not too much of a stretch. But what was interesting, though, is, like, when they got to talk to Wells, it was like, oh, I didn't murder those people. They knew what they were getting into. They signed up for this research. They knew what was going to happen. And he called them subjects. He didn't and that was the whole thing that Dylan was kind of talking about, him kind of being narcissistic, that he's kind of like, oh, I'm the one in charge here. You're my subjects. He doesn't treat them like people. They're part of his experiments. But his twisted mind, it's like, these people are going to die anyway. What about Victor? And it's like, oh, Victor had a fentanyl addiction. He was going to die eventually. It's like, and Lizzie kind of puts the more realistic spin to it. Like, no, you killed him because he was unreliable and you couldn't take the chance he might undo all that you've done. But in his twisted mind, Wells is like, no, I'm doing this for the greater good. Like, these people knew, yes, and because Dylan points out, it's like, no, they didn't know that you were going to literally slice their heads off while they were still alive. Yeah, they knew they were going to potentially be, you put them in a position where it's like, okay, I'll use your body for research and stuff like that. But the fact of the matter is, you did it in his mind, it's like, these people are going to die anyway. Do you know how many people wish that their life had meaning, and these people's lives have meaning? But that's the thing. And even Lizzie says, like, who the hell are you to determine who gets to live? Like, who's worthy, who's worth keeping alive and who isn't? The fact of the matter is, yes, these people might have a ticking clock, but that wasn't your right to kind of cut their lives short for your own. Yes, you might have. Maybe your research can cause benefits in the future, but the fact of the matter is, you don't have the right to do that. So it's like, it's super like twisted. It's almost like like his logic is so twisted that you can never tell him he's wrong. He's like, no, you're wrong. You're the ones that should be going to jail, standing in my way of me doing my research. I'm doing what's right. But basically saying how basically these people's illnesses impact so many people's lives because the burden it puts on people's families, and it tears and destroys families because of the strain that it puts on them. So it's like, you can understand his reasoning, but his reasoning is still batshit crazy, That's where it kind of comes down to. So it's a very interesting resolve to the case. All the while, like I said, Dylan's still dealing with his vision thing. There's a whole Pasternak thing where it's like, I didn't, like, when he was in the MRI machine, he heard Pasternak, I was like, oh, it's all in his head. When he comes out, it's going to seem real, but it's not. But it's like, no, Pasternak was really there. I was like, that surprised me. Interestingly enough, I'm blanking, I don't remember the actor's name, but that actor who plays Pasternak is same actor from Royal Pains. He was the one that I'm forgotten so much about Royal Pains. That's something I didn't even think about, even when watching the show, because Reshma Shetty, she played Divya on Royal Pains, so it's like, oh, there's a kind of connection like that. I didn't even think about that till just this moment. I was like, that's pretty neat. But nevertheless, he claims that he had nothing to do with Maya's death, and the fact is he wants Julian's help because, like, what's actually happening is actually a greater plot, which I'm like, you're a bad guy. They literally tried to kill you, and you're asking for their help now, which is kind of a weird situation where I'm like, maybe he's not a bad guy, or maybe this is some long con. Maybe it's all part of his plan, his need for revenge. I don't know. That was just kind of like the interesting thing. It's interesting too because Lizzie never found out all the details. Like, obviously, like, Dylan was like, I'll tell you about it later, but she found out about Maya being dead, and it's like, oh, she wants to be there for Julian. Just, if you need anything, So Julian's still kind of dealing with that. Also, Dylan being like, oh, Pasternak needs your help. Like, either, yes, we find out that, oh, someone else is involved in Maya's death, or at the very least, we can find out a way to find out what Pasternak is actually up to and then take him down. Because it's interesting, because you also have to think about the fact is, and they bring it up this episode, Maya was a part of working with Pasternak to frame Julian potentially. That's what they thought at first. But now it's like, oh, at first, so he was dealing with the fact that he thought that she betrayed him, was using him, but no, it seems like she was working with Pasternak because I guess you can't really tell him when you're working with Pasternak because he is kind of probably blacklisted. I mean, to be fair, everyone thinks he's dead too. But what's interesting, like, everything about Goodman went back like 30 years. So whatever Pasternak had been up to, like, he had this alias kind of set up and basically gave it a long history to kind of cover his tracks. And he's been hidden for a while. He even talked about the fact that it took him like 2 years to walk after Dylan shot him. So it was an interesting turn of events. So I'm sorry for stumbling on my words a little bit. I don't know what just happened there. Brain fart. The fact is, Dylan finds out later on, though, he's like, my MRI kind of got interrupted, but I think I'm okay. He basically says that it was kind of like an adrenaline rush that kind of like caused like his situation, so it's like, it's not like something serious, which I was kind of worried about. It was kind of interesting because there was no point in the episode where we got talking to Andy about any of this because he didn't want to tell anything to Andy because, well, it might be connected to CIA A stuff, the whole like I'm a nerve agent, but then at the same time it's like, but then he also didn't want to worry Andy if it turns out to be something else. He wanted to find out first before he ended up telling Andy. But for him too, I think it's neat because Dylan ends up talking about, because it's something that had come up earlier in the episode about the whole conversation about the CIA, of how, like, you know, it kind of comes with the territory. Death is just a part of it. You just kind of have to accept it. And Dylan didn't like that aspect anymore, because at first he was one of those CIA agents who kind of went along with it until he met Andy, and Andy made him go like, no, made him realize like death is important. Like, it does matter. Like, you shouldn't be all keen to like, oh, treat death like it's nothing. That's how the spy world treats it, but that's not the way things should be. And Dylan has a more appreciation for life, that he wants to stick around, especially with their baby on the way, you know. So having so much to live for and all that, I thought was kind of beautiful. And obviously Lizzie kind of takes a little bit to a certain extent, because for her, she wants to get out there. It's like there's so much she wants to see in this world, and she just hasn't taken the time to really enjoy herself. So why doesn't she kind of go out there and kind of live her life a little bit? Because she saw how Allison, even with her condition, want to live life as much as possible while she can. So I have this opportunity, stop putting stuff off and just kind of go out there and live. So she gets on Dylan's bike, and he's looking after him, and Andy will be looking after Gary for her. And I love her being like, goodbye, handsome. And he's like, goodbye, Lizzie. He's like, all right, you were talking about the Gary. Yeah, all right, this is awkward. But I love that. I thought that was kind of neat. Obviously, there's, like I said, there's everything with, well, I'll go ahead and say everything was kind of packaged neatly. But yeah, it's just open storylines. Like, the main overarching thing is like, okay, so Pastor Nick most likely wasn't lying. He wasn't the one behind Maya's death. Whatever this greater plot is there some truth that the CIA has been compromised? What about Dylan's dad? What is Julian going to do? The fact is he's got to work with the guy that he, you know, because if I find out you had anything to do with Maya, I will kill you. And he's like, oh, glad to see you haven't changed. So things kind of ended on a somewhat happy note. Obviously, that storyline is still open. So I thought that was pretty neat. But sadly, you know, have to kind of end this off on a sour note. Sadly, Instinct has been canceled. I hope that changes, like, especially with what they're setting up, because it seems like we're going to have, like, a big major plot point. Also, like, Lizzie, you know, saying, like, oh, I'm going to check out these fights, means she's going to kick it with Ryan, most likely. Maybe she set that up ahead of time, or maybe she decided not to go with Ryan, but maybe she decided to go, and now potentially some sparks will fly, and now turn into a whole thing. Maybe we potentially, if the show did come back, we'd get to see more of Ryan. Obviously, I feel like Dylan will end up inadvertently getting dragged deeper into the CIA world, because even though he didn't come to it, it came to him, because obviously what's happening at the precinct was kind of a precursor. It's like just the tip of the iceberg, as Pastor Nick kind of put it. So also like a former enemy coming back as a potential ally. Like, I would love to know where that storyline went. Plus Andy, Sam and Dylan, that whole situation, the whole family situation of like, oh yeah, having a, you know, adopting a kid, you know, what that dynamic looks like now. Whether or not they're, like I said, Dylan seems like he's okay, but not unless we end up finding out later on that there's something more to it. But I think the way they handle it kind of makes it seem like, nah, it was just kind of a thing. So I would love to see the show come back for a third season. I don't know. I mean, you know, CBS could always end up changing their mind. Maybe someone else ends up picking it up. But I kind of should have known, just because it was like they were running through this season too fast, because they were doubling. There were 2 weeks of them doubling up on episodes. That's kind of weird, I feel like. But regardless, like I said, for now, it's not coming back for a third season. But I am hopeful that that could change. This is a really good show. I love what they've done with this season. I'd love to see what they do with season 3. But really, that's all I want to talk about. Until the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.